power, such power given to men. Both the first reading and the second are deliberately chosen because they follow what would have been for centuries a day of ordination. The 4 seasons, quattro tempora, it comes into English as ember days, but it's a corruption of tempora. The 4 seasons had their days of prayer and fasting and ordaining. And so we have a reference in the first reading to power in the word, and in the gospel to power in the sacrament. This falls very well on this day of great importance to English speakers, especially in the British Isles themselves. I think you know why. It also happens to be, by a strange coincidence, the ancient memorial of St. Edward the Confessor, the chaste king who chose to remain clean and pure and had many gifts, it would seem, and was the instrument of divine providence in giving us the great Abbey of St. Peter, more commonly known as Westminster Abbey. Pope Benedict venerated him there with emotion when he came, and on the same occasion himself beatified John Henry Newman, close to where he had lived, at Birmingham. And on this day, he is now officially in the album of saints. I think I've mentioned before that a friend of mine who was doing her research on Newman at university, she became a Catholic at university, and she was doing her thesis on the concept of authority in Newman, and she was reading day after day, volume after volume of all his correspondence, about 20,000 letters. We have them all. They were all in the library because they were printed afterwards, because he kept a copy, and he wrote them a second time to have a copy. And she thought he wouldn't make it. The reason being that he wrote so much, and they're very keen on examining every word. But he did. I want to zoom into 3 elements in the great Newman, who I discovered partly because I was given him to study by the good Carmelite Welsh-speaking priest who heard my confessions for 3 years at university. I lived with him, actually. And he wanted me to have all the solid force of Newman in my being. The Apologia and the essay on the development of Christian doctrine, which he wrote as an Anglican. And he himself admits that in 1837 already his thought was causing him puzzlement. He had a great logical mind. So, I want you to follow me into various steps. Here's this wonderful English prose, one of the last to write in this high English style. It's a pleasure to hear it. Now just listen to this tiny sample of his thought, and also listen to the diction. Now, it is very intelligible to deny that there is any divinely established, divinely commissioned church at all. But to hold that the one church is realized and perfected in each of 1,000 independent corporate units, coordinate, bound by no necessary intercommunion, adjusted into no divine organized whole, is a tenet not merely unknown to Scripture, but so plainly impossible to carry out practically as to make it clear that it never would have been devised except by men, who, conscientiously believing in a visible church, and who, conscientiously opposed to Rome, had nothing left for them, whether they would or not, but to entrench themselves in the paradox that the church was one indeed, and the church was Catholic indeed, but that the one church was not the Catholic, and that the Catholic Church was not the one, and on he goes to explode it. His mind gets there, against his will, if you like. But he never sinned against the truth, against the light. He was faithful, no matter where it was leading him. My best friend was studying where he was for years, Oriel. I used to visit him over the weekend sometime as students. And we prayed one time for his canonization, using the prayer, the official one, at his room in Oriel, where for years he studied and wrote. He became enamoured of the Church Fathers, which of course was the problem. Now he collaborated with John Keble, whom he admired greatly, and Edward Pusey, who were beginning to intuit that the Anglican Church needed a revival, but of the Catholic sort. Newman himself, as a young man, was influenced hugely by the evangelical movement within the Anglican Church. And by the way, little parenthesis, my best friend Paul, even though he was high church, son of a high church minister, chose to go to the evangelicals at Wycliffe in Oxford to do his theology because he wanted a good biblical formation. The Anglican evangelical thing is quite powerful. I close that parenthesis. But Newman was in there, which gave him one thing which I want you to remember. He never denied the validity of the encounter with Jesus as a person. It comes through in the motto he chose as a cardinal: cor ad cor loquitur. Heart to heart speaks. He meant by that several things. It comes from St. Francis of Sales, who gave it to his sisters, the visitation nuns, as a whole spirituality of love and tenderness, working in God and amongst the sisters. But it was initially, in the mind of Newman, a reflection of what you can't get away from. And he never denied or forsook this. It's not enough to have a structure. It has to be vivified by this love of Jesus as a person. And that bit, say what you like, our evangelical brethren have got right. Jesus loved and met. Because if that's there, the rest will follow, including what happened to Newman and actually what happened to me. Because you're looking for the truth in Jesus, you love Jesus, he will show you it if you want to. But it starts from there. I want to know all that you want me to show me, Lord, even if it hurts. I want to know, is this myth about the Roman Catholic monster true? We assume it is it? Show me. And he finds a way of showing you. Unexpectedly sometimes. It hit me between the eyes when I was 13, just walking into a high mass in our local parish in Cardiff. Wow! The church was packed and overflowing, and there was clouds of incense. It was still after the council hadn't been changed, and I was moved. This is not the same what we've got. I knew it sometimes, somehow in my heart. So cor ad cor loquitur. But then, the question of orders. If you look at a Catholic bishop, he's got it all. Mitre, crozier, pectoral cross, and everything. But if I put on that clobber, I'm still Father David. It doesn't make a difference. In fact, I've got more than the average bishop in the Anglican Church, because he's not yet even confirmed. Either you've got it or you haven't. Now remember my friend Paul, writing to me from Oxford, in Latin he quoted this. I won't quote the Doctor Tweed long, but he went into this. We, quoting an Anglican bishop, believe in a presence no less true than yours, but we do not hasten to define its nature. I just calmly wrote back in Latin, non sufficit credere, oportet et habere. It's not enough to believe, it behoves also to have. It's not what you wear or what you do. It doesn't matter how much incense you use, it's either there or not, and doesn't depend on the faith of the celebrant or the community. So Newman saw the problem. Before it had been defined, it was defined in 1896 by Leo XIII in Apostolici Curae, utterly null and completely void, omnino iritum. At the time Newman came in 1845, it was not quite clear, did the Anglicans have it or not? And he came out with this. In moral theology, you can follow different schools when it comes to directing souls and confessing, between probabilior and probabilist, different schools of strictness, because you're within the parameters of what you can actually opine as sort of probable. But there's one exception, and it's a very important one. There's one field and one field alone in which you have to be, in the other school, the strictest possible, what is called tutsiorist, surer, absolutely 101% sure. It's sacramental theology, especially in sacraments which have effects on other sacraments, fontal sacraments. If you're baptized, it makes a difference. If you put your hands as a bishop on a person who's not validly baptized, it won't pass. Put them on a woman, it won't pass either. Put them on a Muslim, it won't pass either. It has to be a vessel who is capable of holding it. An electric current won't pass through certain conductors. And so it is that when it comes to also ordaining, it matters awfully whether, first of all, it's coming down from the apostles or not. And it matters awfully also whether the actual formula and matter used are valid. And what he argues is this: at least we're sure that what's coming in the Roman Catholic heritage, the formula they have, the gestures used, we absolutely know that it's bound to be authentic. We know it. Whereas we can't be quite sure with the Anglican thing. There's that doubt niggling. And you know that my friend Paul, he said this in one conversation: I'll get hold of somebody who has the recuperated line for Utrecht, because after the breakaway in Utrecht, the old Catholics came over, but they had the orders, and they would somehow find a way of getting a third bishop coming from Utrecht to lay hands on a bishop, to get back the orders, which they themselves secretly were admitting weren't sure of, which says a lot. So he saw clearly what mattered when it came to ordination. By the way, I told you before how the Anglican logic gets away with it. I was with my friend Paul before the provost of Pusey House, which was built, of course, by Pusey, and listening to their conversation, and the provost, Cheslin Jones, was muttering to my friend, "Yeah, the Anglican church is a zoo, in which every animal can do its own thing, as long as it doesn't get in the way of the animal in the cage next to him." Logic. The third point, the conscience, very quickly. He had this to say: the conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ, as far as my soul is concerned. He knew that he responded to his conscience, and that applies to each one here. We sin against the light. And he saw at one point that if he carried on in the Anglican Church, he was beginning to sin against the light of truth. And thereby it was no longer an intellectual game, and his question became, can I stay where I am and be saved? What shall I do? There was a blessed in the area, a Passionist, Blessed Dominic, who understood his soul and received him discreetly into the Catholic Church in 1845. Providence worked through the whispering that came through Bishop Wiseman, later head of the church and cardinal. Think of the oratory. Do you know why he was given this intuition? It permitted Newman a structure in which one element was very important and could be maintained. Friendship. Like Aylward of Rievaulx, another great Englishman, an abbot, Cistercian, he maintained that God was friendship. Deus caritas est. And this friendship came through. Even though he was Oxfordian, he drew as a magnet. He cared. And we know from looking at the pictures in his room to this day that his friends are in the pictures on the wall. And even as a Catholic before dying, he went to find the elderly Keble and Pusey and had tea with them. Friendship mattered to the end. And he knew also that in the oratory he would find a structure in which he could work with others, which gave him a huge force. I conclude. Some years ago, I was in the church that he built. And remember, he travelled about 52 times over the Irish Sea, and that wasn't easy without the system that we have now. And he created the present University Church, with the hope probably of having an oratory there that didn't work. But I've celebrated there more than once, and I've used his chalice in the old rite, and it's very moving. Time stands still. As at the altar of St. Philip Neri I've celebrated, it's exactly the same experience. There is power unchanged, the power of the saints. It sent Philip Neri into ecstasy. It sent John Newman into sanctity, but gave both power and serenity. The power that we can claim, that we have here at the altar, and that no one can attack, no synod or any human force. We have amongst us the power of the sacraments coming from the apostolic succession, but we have to protect it for all we're worth against what is attacking it right now. The demon wants to destroy the church.